I want to talk to you about representations of Brazilian culture in Japan by Japanese Brazilians. And I want to begin by the basic idea about Japanese Brazilians in Japan is that, well, okay, they look Japanese, they have Japanese blood, but once they come to Japan, they realize that they are culturally Brazilians. So the dominant view on Japanese Brazilians is that they reject their Japanese ethnic ties and they adopt traditional Brazilian symbols, like, for instance, carnival. Now, the problem that I want to propose is that, well, carnival can also be seen as a Brazilian stereotype with no basis on concrete experiences. So in this case, Japanese Brazilians try to respond by producing alternative representations of Brazilian culture that, to them, are based on previous experiences in Brazil. So how do they do that? Well, when they evoke their previous experiences in Brazil, they can do that, of course, based on Brazilian symbols. And this is a traditional, well, popular festival in Brazil called Festa Junina. And even though it's not as well known as Carnival, most Brazilians in Brazil have taken part in this kind of festival because it's part of the school curriculum. But not only they can use Brazilian symbols when they evoke their experiences in Brazil, they can also evoke Japanese symbols. This is a painting made by a Japanese Brazilian in Japan, and he's making reference to a Japanese legend of Urashima Taro, who is a boy who goes to an undersea kingdom riding a turtle, and then after decades he comes back to his village and doesn't recognize anything. In this case, the boy represents the Japanese Brazilian who returns to Japan and can't recognize Japan anymore because it's too modernized. So the message here is that, well, Japanese Brazilians in Brazil are more Japanese than the Japanese themselves, which is a very common discourse in Brazil. So it's a Japanese symbol that they experience it in Brazil and they bring it to Japan. And there's a third way they can evoke experiences in Brazil, which is through Western symbols. Especially young Japanese Brazilians try to express their attachment to Brazil using Western symbols like American pop music or Hollywood movies. This is a pamphlet from a store that specializes in Brazilian goods. So among those Brazilian goods, they're selling DVDs of American TV shows. Now, what are the implications of this, the way they explore their experiences in Brazil? I think the important thing is that once we pay attention to the idea of experiences in Brazil, instead of thinking of a binary opposition between Brazilian symbols and Japanese symbols, Brazil and Japan, we can add a third element. I'm calling it Western symbols or the West. So I think it's more productive to think of Japanese Brazilians in terms of these three terms. And of course, the meanings that are attributed to each of these terms change. For instance, when a Japanese Brazilians say, well, Japanese Brazilians are more Japanese than the Japanese, or because 1 in every 10 words the Japanese say is in English. They're representing the West as an imperialist power, and they have an ambivalent position about Japan because on the one hand, Japan is an accomplice of the West, but it can resist to the West if it turns to its true traditions that are forgotten. And Brazil, in this case, is depicted as a focus of resistance. But on the other hand, when Japanese Brazilians say, well, I want to go back to Brazil because the Japanese don't know about U2, the Irish rock band. So in this case, they are given a very different meaning to each of these terms. So the West is viewed positively as a source of global culture, and Japan is viewed negatively as a conservative country. And in this case, Brazil is viewed positively as part of global culture because it's part of the West. And of course, there are many other discourses and possibilities, and I hope I can talk more about it during the poster session. Thank you very much.